It's week 3 of fantasy football, and at the rate we're going, we're going to be out of healthy players by week 6. We're already talking about players to potentially start this week that we hadn't even intended on talking about for months. But just like anything else, adapt and overcome and dive into some week 3 rankings. That's right, today we're talking about quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end rankings for week 3. Now before we get into the rankings, I need to announce a winner for the signed Travis Etienne jersey from last week's video. So I randomly selected a winner from the comment section of that video, and congratulations to Braden Batson 6027. Braden, send me an email to info@thefantasyheadliners.com from that account right there so I can go ahead and get you hooked up. Now, in case you already missed it, Kyle is giving away a signed Kyler Murray mini helmet in our wide receiver start and sit video, so be sure to check that out as well. But let's go ahead and dive into the rankings. Just a quick reminder, if you're looking for more detailed information on all these players, that is in the start sit videos. This is meant to be a quick run through. And remember, our rankings aren't supposed to match. If they did, it would be pointless to watch ranking videos. Trying to gain others' perspectives on players is what helps us build the best rankings in all the land. So let's go ahead and dive into quarterbacks first. All right, but just like we're going to do each and every week, let's go over a few of my bigger hits and misses from the quarterback position. Some of the hits, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, I had them ranked pretty high last week. They came out and even exceeded my expectations. If you watch the film of Kyler Murray, that may be his best game ever as a professional quarterback. It was pretty special. Baker continues to go out there and be the bake show. When it comes to misses, Anthony Richardson had a poor week. I had him ranked way too high. If he doesn't have that rushing upside, he kind of hurts your team right this second. And then Tua, another guy that I expected a whole lot more from in week 2 going up against Buffalo. Did I expect them to win that ball game? It doesn't really matter. I don't care about wins in fantasy football. I care about fantasy points, and Tua just didn't score very many of them. And really some unfortunate things in that game, not just the injury, but a couple of the interceptions early. Not even his fault, but regardless, a bad game. But now we'll transition over into this week's rankings, so we'll go ahead and bring them up here on the screen. And right here in Tier 1, we got Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, and Patrick Mahomes. Josh Allen in a matchup going up against Jacksonville. Expect him to have to do more this week than what we saw just last week, where James Cook was basically all the offense Buffalo needed. Then Lamar Jackson in a matchup going up against the Dallas Cowboys on the road in Dallas. Really expect that rushing upside to continue this week for Lamar Jackson. Really the same thing for Jalen Hurts, right? It kind of saved his week in week 2. Now a matchup going up against New Orleans. We really don't know what to expect from New Orleans because they haven't really been challenged yet on defense. And we also know that Jalen Hurts is going to have to rely on his legs a little bit more while A.J. Brown is banged up. Then we got Kyler Murray in a great matchup going up against Detroit. He's going to be at home in Arizona. And with him and Marvin Harrison clicking, you got to have Kyler Murray higher because of that rushing upside as well. Patrick Mahomes this week going up against Atlanta. Mahomes hasn't really been elite to start the season. But now the running game is even banged up with Isaiah Pacheco out and a lot of question marks in the backfield. Patrick Mahomes is going to be slinging that rock here in week 3. Then we go down to Tier 2. This is where I have C.J. Stroud, Jaden Daniels, Anthony Richardson, Baker Mayfield, Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, and Jared Goff. Now for C.J. Stroud, he's got a matchup going up against Minnesota, and he had a down week last week in week 2. I really wanted to see him find the end zone through the air one more time. That's also me being selfish because I would have won like $600 on Underdog had he done it, but hey, I'll let it go. But what we did see last week is that Nico Collins is unstoppable, and they still haven't unlocked Tank Dell in this offense, so he's still right here at the top of Tier 2. Then Jaden Daniels in a matchup going up against Cincinnati, a great matchup. Even though Jaden Daniels isn't finding the end zone much through the air, he's definitely finding a way to rack up some yardage. The touchdowns will come. I expect it this week against Cincinnati. Then we go to Anthony Richardson in a matchup going up against Chicago. Now the Chicago defense is pretty underrated, but there is word circulating that we could get Josh Downs back this week as well in the passing game. I'm just hoping that the Colts realized last week that if they want to have chances winning ball games, Anthony Richardson is going to have to run a little bit more. Then we have Baker Mayfield, the bake show in Tampa Bay, in a great matchup going up against Denver. Sure, Mike Evans could struggle against Patrick Surtain, but when you have the likes of Chris Godwin out there just racking up receptions and yardage, I don't expect Baker Mayfield to take that far of a step back. Also expecting a little bit more from Rachaad White this week. Then we have Joe Burrow right here, and a lot of people are like, wow, how come Joe Burrow is so high? He's playing Washington, and they allow points in bunches to opposing quarterbacks, so Joe Burrow's made it inside my top 10 for this week. Then next guy up is Dak Prescott in a matchup going up against Baltimore. Really hoping that Dak can get Jake Ferguson back this week, because once we pair him with CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks and now Jalen Tolbert, that's definitely going to give Dak a safer floor. And then we got Jared Goff. Just a great matchup. I know a lot of people were disappointed in Jared Goff, but the dude is a safe, reliable fantasy quarterback, and now he gets to go to Arizona and probably put up a big number. Which will then take us down to tier 3, where I have Derek Carr, Brock Purdy, Geno Smith, Sam Darnold, and Kirk Cousins. Now, Derek Carr has come out here to start the season and looks like an MVP candidate. Now he's got a game at home against Philly, who's easier to throw on than they are to run on. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I'm kind of a pessimist when it comes to Derek Carr, because at some point I think the wheels are just gonna fall off. But he's been playing absolute great football here to start the season, so he's still right here at the top of tier 3, ahead of Brock Purdy. And really, this has everything to do with all the injuries in San Francisco. Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel. Now, obviously, he's going to have to rely a lot more on Brandon Ayuk, and it's a great matchup going up against the Rams, who just got torched by Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. Then we have Geno Smith, and it's the return of good Geno in 2024. They're actually giving him some protection, and now that they've unlocked JSN, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, we could definitely see Geno's floor creep up weekly in a matchup this week going up against Miami, which is in disarray after losing Tua. Then we got Sam Darnold, who's playing great football right now, going up against the Houston Texans. This is not an easy matchup whatsoever. I'm glad we dodged the Justin Jefferson injury. He's going to need him here this week. He's right here towards the bottom of tier 3, right where Kirk Cousins is at as well. That comeback victory in week 2. A lot of people didn't think Kirk had it in him, but now he's got a matchup this week going up against Kansas City. It is easier to throw on Kansas City than run on them. And maybe this is the week that we see a little bit more Kyle Pitts, because Kansas City has been susceptible to the tight ends here in 2024. Now, you may be asking yourself, why didn't I see Jordan Love's name anywhere? He's back at practice. Now, obviously, if Jordan Love plays, he's going to make it here inside the top 3 tiers. It is just still a huge question mark whether or not he plays. Now, for those of you who are wondering where he may fit in if he does play this week, it's going to be right there at the bottom of tier 2. It's not the easiest matchup for him going up against Tennessee, and do we see him somewhat limited coming off the knee injury? Just something to pay attention to, but I wanted to be sure to throw it out there because I know people are going to be wondering. Which will then take us to running backs, and let's take a look at some of my bigger hits and misses at this position last week. For the hits, it was James Conner, Ramondre Stevens season, and Rachaad White, who I had ranked a little bit lower. A lot of people still had him super high in the rankings, but with that tough matchup last week, I dropped him down, and hopefully it paid off for a lot of people if they sat him. Some of my bigger misses, Joe Mixon. That one absolutely hurt, but honestly, I'm just thankful that we escaped a major injury by the hip drop tackle that he suffered. Then Devin Singletary, I did not have him high enough in my rankings, and honestly, I have a hard time putting any giant super high in my rankings. Malik Neighbors is about my limit, if you know what I mean. And then J.K. Dobbins. I had him inside my top 24. Obviously, I didn't have him high enough, though. But let's go ahead and bring up week 3's rankings here, and we'll start it off in tier 1 at Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, Alvin Kamara, Jordan Mason, Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, and Devon Achane. Now, for Saquon Barkley, he's got a matchup going up against New Orleans, but honestly, this one is all about touchdowns. Barkley's going to have a chance at him every single week. Then I have Jahmyr Gibbs going up against the Arizona Cardinals. The matchup is absolutely great. I honestly think both Gibbs and Montgomery could feast in week 3. Then Bijan Robinson going up against Kansas City is not going to be an easy task whatsoever, but his involvement in the passing game is what really gives him the safer floor this week, in my opinion. Then we have Alvin Kamara, who just did Alvin Kamara things in week 2. Now a matchup going up against Philadelphia. Philly, a very tough team to run against, but the way that Alvin Kamara can take a short pass the distance is what's kept his floor super high majority of his career. Then we have Jordan Mason of the San Francisco 49ers. Like we've said before, it's plug and play in this backfield. Whoever the running back is, whoever's getting the touches, is going to get fantasy points. Now they're going to go up against the Rams, who were torched by James Conner. Then we got Breece Hall in a matchup going up against New England. Now, just because we saw Braylon Allen last week doesn't mean Breece Hall is losing his job. He's still getting 20 plus touches a week, so I got him in tier 1 still. Then Jonathan Taylor, going up against the Chicago Bears. Not an easy matchup for Jonathan Taylor whatsoever. But I really look at Jonathan Taylor as a safer floor type running back. Once the touchdowns come, he's going to be a ceiling player that's going to be winning you matchups, so I still got him in tier 1, along with Devon Achane. The guy was supposedly a game time decision last week and went out and had some of the most touches he's ever had in an NFL game and looked pretty dang good doing it. Now a better matchup going up against Seattle this week, and we have to expect that he's going to see great volume once again, so he's right here at the bottom of tier 1. But then we go down to tier 2, where it's Derrick Henry, Travis Etienne, Josh Jacobs, James Cook, Ramondre Stevenson, Brian Robinson, David Montgomery, and Tony Pollard. For Derrick Henry, the safe floor continues. Now going up against Dallas, they're not as scary as they used to be. Look for King Henry to continue finding the end zone. Then we have Travis Etienne in a great matchup this week going up against Buffalo. Look at what Devon Achane did against this defense last week just due to volume and touches. Etienne, another one of those guys that gets that volume. Then Josh Jacobs going up against Tennessee is not an easy matchup whatsoever. But what we're really waiting to find out here is the availability of Jordan Love, because if they can open up the passing game, that's only going to help out Josh Jacobs, who still found a way to put up big yardage last week, just barely missed out on a big day because he fumbled on the goal line. Then we got James Cook right here, 12th overall in a matchup going up against Jacksonville. James Cook proved last week that he doesn't need a whole lot of volume. He can make a big day happen with just a few amount of plays. Now, obviously, from a greedy standpoint, I think he should be getting more touches each and every week, because that'll give him that weekly safer floor and we won't be as reliant on the big plays. But for now, got him right here in tier 2. Then Ramondre Stevenson. The dude is a bell cow running back right now and people aren't even talking about it. In a matchup going up against the Jets, I 100% expect Ramondre Stevenson to get right around 20 touches once again. Then Brian Robinson. This guy is severely underrated as of right now going up against Cincinnati. Did you know that he has the same amount of targets this year as Austin Eckler? That involvement in the pass catching game is what's keeping him higher here in the rankings. Then at 15, it's David Montgomery in that great matchup going against Arizona. It seems like David Montgomery scores a touchdown every freaking week of fantasy football, and honestly, I don't expect that to change this week. Then we have Tony Pollard in a matchup going up against Green Bay. A great matchup for Tony Pollard. Green Bay has been very susceptible to opposing running backs the start of the 2024 season. And that split in the backfield that we were worried about is sitting right now at right about 70-30, so Pollard's getting the touches, and that's why he's right here in the bottom of tier 2. Which will take us down to tier 3, where I got Zach Charbonnet, Kyren Williams, Rashad White, J.K. Dobbins, James Conner, Aaron Jones, Najee Harris, and Zach Moss. But we'll start off with Zach Charbonnet, and as of right now, we do not know for sure whether or not we're going to have Kenneth Walker this week. If we do, he slides right into this Charbonnet spot. But we know this offense definitely utilizes Zach Charbonnet when Kenneth Walker is out of the lineup. Now a matchup this week going against Miami, who was just torched by the big plays of James Cook last week. Then we have Kyren Williams. This is not a Kyren Williams issue. He's going up against the San Francisco 49ers, but that's not even the issue as well. It's the fact that his offensive line is Swiss cheese, and this defense can't stop opponents from scoring points quick enough for them to actually establish a running game weekly. Then we got Rashad White. He escaped an injury, a groin injury last week, and now a matchup going up against Denver. While I do expect him to have a better week here this week, there is some underlining concerns that maybe we see a little bit more Bucky Irving if Rashad White isn't 100% healthy. Then I got J.K. Dobbins, and arguably his most difficult matchup of the season going on the road to Pittsburgh. If Dobbins can go on the road to Pittsburgh and put up another 100-yard rushing game, he may end up climbing up inside the top 15 to 12 at the position starting next week. Then we got James Conner. I love James Conner. I am a James Conner truther, but he's going against Detroit, and Detroit is one of, if not the best run defense in the league. It's going to be very hard for James Conner to find open running lanes, and I definitely expect them to utilize the passing game more in Arizona this week. Then we got Aaron Jones in a matchup going up against Houston. They're just another one of those defenses, though, that are severely underrated in Houston. Aaron Jones is going to have a hard time finding running lanes this week. Then we got Najee Harris in a matchup going up against the Chargers. We're starting to see Jaylen Warren be a little bit more healthy, which means less touches for Najee. And then Zach Moss in a matchup going up against Washington should be great, but I definitely expect Joe Burrow to find more success in the air this week against Washington. Now, if they can get a lead early, we may see a lot of Zach Moss late, but as of late, it's been really hard to trust the Cincinnati offense. Which will then take us down to tier 4. It's Zamir White, DeAndre Swift, Jerome Ford, Devin Singletary, Javonte Williams, Austin Eckler, and then I'm also throwing in Kenneth Walker and Joe Mixon just so a lot of people don't ask where they are. Now for Zamir White, this may be the highest I've ranked him all year long, and it's because they're playing the Carolina Panthers, who are probably one of the worst teams in football. Then DeAndre Swift, who really hasn't done anything this year for Chicago, but now has a great matchup going up against Indianapolis on the road. Caleb Williams has struggled. They're going to need to rely more on the running game to take some pressure off of his shoulders, which will then bring us down to Jerome Ford. This is another one of those backfields that it's really hard to figure out what is the split going to be. They got a matchup at home against the Giants. Then we go down to Devin Singletary, his opponent in that game. Like I said a little bit earlier, really hard for me to trust any pieces in this New York Giants offense that's not named Malik Neighbors. Which then brings us to Javonte Williams. My biggest concern for Javonte Williams this week is that Tampa Bay gets an early lead and Denver has to abandon the run game. Then we go down to Austin Eckler. The guy has been okay fantasy-wise. He's been a decent low-end flex play for back-to-back weeks. He's not going to rack up a ton of volume, but he's been very productive and very efficient with what he's gotten. And then, like I said, Kenneth Walker, we're really waiting to find out whether or not he's going to play. If he does, he slides right up into tier 3 where Zach Charbonnet is currently sitting. And then Joe Mixon. Sounds like he escaped that major injury. If he's limited at all or if he does miss, I just didn't want to throw him too high. Now, if Joe Mixon plays in this matchup against Minnesota, he is going to go up inside tier 2 for me. And when it comes to the rankings, he's going to be right there in between Ramondre Stevenson and Brian Robinson Jr., so just a name to pay attention to as the week goes on. Which will then take us to wide receivers and a few of my hits or misses from just last week. What about Marvin Harrison Jr.? People were panicked after 1 week. I showed faith. I kept him inside the top 12. Dude had a huge game, obviously. Same thing with Nico Collins. Had him inside my top 12 last week as well. He is the true alpha in this offense, and it's making Tank Dell screw over a lot of people. And then Chris Godwin, the guy who I had ranked highly all offseason. He's almost on the verge of being a top 12 option weekly. But then we go down to misses and Calvin Ridley. I was not expecting that huge of a game last week. What about Jackson Smith and Jigba? Dude grabbed an opportunity and absolutely ran with it. Did not have him ranked high enough. And then Devontae Smith, I was low on as well. Now at the time, we didn't know about AJ Brown, but still I should have had him a little bit higher. But now let's bring up week 3 and dive into tier 1. And right here in tier 1, I got CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Marvin Harrison Jr., Nico Collins, Devontae Adams, and Jamar Chase. And dang, how crazy is it to not have Tyreek Hill in tier 1? This absolutely blows. But at the top, we got CeeDee Lamb. We know the volume is going to be there against Baltimore, which can definitely be thrown on through the air. Then we have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who was out there just collecting targets in week 2 after everyone was terrified after the first week. Great matchup for him going up against Arizona. Justin Jefferson, he escaped an injury, now going up against the Houston Texans. Not the easiest of matchups, but when you're seeing that kind of target share and with the way that Sam Darnold is playing, I still got him here in tier 1. Marvin Harrison Jr., a great matchup for him going up against Detroit. A lot easier to throw on the Lions than it is to run on them. Nico Collins, like I just said, dude is the absolute alpha in this offense and cannot be stopped. At this point, I don't even really care who he plays. As long as CJ Stroud has him on the field, he's throwing him the football. Then we got Devontae Adams, and the guard dog is starting to warm up a little bit in Gardner Minshew. We saw him pepper Michael Pittman Jr. last year in Indianapolis. Expect the same to continue to happen to Devontae Adams. And then lo and behold, it's Jamar Chase. And people have been super frustrated with him to start the season. But how can you really right the ship? A matchup against the Washington Commanders, who allow some of the most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers in the NFL. Which then takes us down to tier 2. It's Rashee Rice, Garrett Wilson, Brandon Ayuk, Chris Godwin, Chris Olave, Mike Evans, and here is Tyreek Hill at the bottom of tier 2. Now for Rashee Rice, he is the most constant in this overall offense. With the running game banged up, I expect to see a whole lot of 2024 slant boy in week 3 against the Atlanta Falcons. Then we have Garrett Wilson, the home opener against New England, and I really expect them to try to give him a couple deep shots in this game that could really raise his ceiling. Here's Brandon Ayuk. We already talked about Debo and CMC banged up. They're going to have to throw the ball to Ayuk going up against the Rams, who were just torched by Marvin Harrison Jr. Then we have Chris Godwin. Dude has been safe, reliable, and a target hog out of the slot, just like we talked about all year long. Now a matchup against Denver, we know Mike Evans is going to have Patrick Surtain, so Chris Godwin should feast. Then we have another Chris. It's Chris Olave in a matchup going up against Philly. The target share is there. What we're really needing in New Orleans is a closer game. New Orleans is out there scoring 40 plus a week, and they don't really need Chris Olave for a whole lot of it. Hopefully Philadelphia can keep pace, they can keep scoring, and we'll get more balls down the field to Chris Olave. And then as we round out tier 2, it's Mike Evans and Tyreek Hill. For Mike Evans, he's got the difficult matchup this week going up against Patrick Surtain. He's going to need that big play this week. And then Tyreek Hill, it all comes down to quarterback play. And honestly, with Skylar Thompson, I don't have that warm fuzzy that we're going to see very many Tyreek deep balls anytime soon. We're going to need a couple short underneath routes that he can evade tackles on to maybe turn into a big play if he's going to score some fantasy points. Which means now we'll go down to tier 3. It's where I have Zay Flowers, DK Metcalf, Jamison Williams, Devontae Smith, Malik Neighbors, Drake London, and DJ Moore. For Zay Flowers, dude's pretty much going to get 10 targets a week in a matchup this week going up against Dallas. I love that opportunity for 10 plus targets once again, which really makes him a safe, reliable wide receiver. Then DK Metcalf in a matchup going up against Miami. Not the easiest of matchups whatsoever, but with the way that Geno Smith is playing right now, the way they're protecting Geno Smith, he's able to find wide receivers all over the field. Plus now Miami really has to worry about not just Tyler Lockett, but Jackson Smith and Jigba as well. Then we got Jamison Williams of the Detroit Lions in that great matchup going up against Arizona. The dude is getting a big play almost every single week. We love to see the breakout. Devontae Smith right here going up against New Orleans. But with the way that New Orleans has played here as of late, I don't know if we see a whole lot of big plays going the way of Devontae Smith this week. Then we got Malik Neighbors. It was a great week for him last week. This week, going to be a little bit tougher going on the road to face the Cleveland Browns. Then Drake London in a matchup going up against Kansas City. Now we saw Drake London find the end zone last week. And in this matchup, you have to expect that Atlanta's going to have to throw the ball to find more success since it's so difficult to run on Kansas City. Hoping for back-to-back weeks here in the end zone for Drake London. Then at 21, we got DJ Moore in a matchup going up against Indianapolis. The matchup is great. The quarterback play is not. And we saw some of that frustration last week with DJ Moore. But the facts remain this. Rome Odunze not seeing a whole lot of volume. Keenan Allen not 100% healthy. They're not really utilizing the tight end position and they can't run the football. They have to find a way to get DJ Moore more touches each week. And I expect it to start in week 3. Which then takes us to tier 4 where I have Stephon Diggs, George Pickens, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Rashid Shaheed, Tank Dell, Amari Cooper, and Michael Pittman. Now for Stephon Diggs, he's kind of the middleman in Houston, right? Tank Dell's barely getting anything. Nico is absolutely feasting, and somewhere in the middle is Stephon Diggs, but this is somewhat quote-unquote of a revenge game, going back to Minnesota to face the team he started with. Those days are probably over with, but still, I got him right here at 22. Then we got George Pickens in a matchup going up against the Chargers. Really hasn't been able to reel in that big play just due to penalties on the offensive side of the football, and that's really made him a little bit more risky. Then Jackson Smith and Jigba coming off his huge week 2 performance in that matchup going up against Miami. And even though we can't expect a huge game like week 2 every week, I do expect to see him in the neighborhood of 7 to 8 targets weekly. Then Rashid Shaheed, who basically is a big play waiting to happen. Dude has gone back-to-back weeks with huge touchdowns. Now a matchup going up against Philadelphia. Can he do it 3 times in a row? Then we have Tank Dell right here. And I'm going to say it like I've said it before. At some time this season, Tank Dell is going to go the hell off, and most likely it's going to be on your bench. It's really hard to have confidence in a player that just put up negative receiving yards the week prior. The opportunities may be limited, but they're still there weekly. And just for his potential alone, I've kept him right here in tier 4, with Amari Cooper in a matchup going up against the New York Giants. Which Deshaun Watson shows up? Because that's really the question. And is Jerry Jeudy taking over that wide receiver 1 role in Cleveland? And then Michael Pittman. Why is he so low? We could see the return of Josh Downs this week in a difficult matchup going up against Chicago. Which then only leaves us tier 5. It's Jaden Reed, Calvin Ridley, Deontay Johnson, Jalen Waddle, Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas, Terry McLaurin, Khalil Shakir, and Demarcus Robinson. Now obviously this is not an easy matchup for Jaden Reed going up against Tennessee, but really what we're waiting to hear on here is the availability of Jordan Love. He was back at practice and limited. If he plays, Jaden Reed is going to climb these rankings. His opponent in that game, Calvin Ridley, coming off a huge week 2. It's a lot harder to throw on Green Bay than run on them though, so I really expect Tony Pollard to be a thing this week. I'm not going to expect a huge game each and every week from Calvin Ridley. Then Deontay Johnson, a new quarterback now. It's not Bryce Young, it's the Red Rifle, Andy Dalton. And honestly, when it comes to Deontay Johnson, that is a good thing. This is a definite good thing for Deontay Johnson. But what is not a good thing is the overall Carolina offense. So until we see it really start performing, I have a hard time putting Deontay Johnson any higher. Then we have Jalen Waddle. Super low, and I hate to do it in the matchup going up against Seattle, but with Skylar Thompson under center, the big plays are going to be limited, and if they happen, I see Tyreek Hill getting more of those opportunities. Talking about big play, the next guy up is Xavier Worthy of the Kansas City Chiefs going up against Atlanta. People have already seen that weekly, he's going to be a boom or bust type guy. You can't rely on him weekly, but if you play him the right week, he wins you your matchup. That's a nightmare for fantasy football. Then Brian Thomas Jr., a difficult matchup going up against Buffalo. Buffalo just made the Miami Dolphins offense look like a 10-year-old Pop Warner team last week, and he's really one of those guys that needs the big touchdown as well. Then Terry McLaurin. At some point, just like Tank Dell, Terry McLaurin is going to go the hell off, and it's probably going to be on a lot of people's benches this week, a matchup going up against Cincinnati, but he's definitely one of those guys that's going to bounce back at some point here in the near future. Then Khalil Shakir, who, yes, is the #1 wide receiver in Buffalo in a matchup this week going up against Jacksonville. Neither Keon Coleman or Curtis Samuel are really a thing in this offense right now. The main guy that's racking up targets weekly is Khalil Shakir, and then lastly, it's Demarcus Robinson of the Los Angeles Rams in a matchup going up against San Francisco. Demarcus Robinson finds himself being the #1 wide receiver in LA right now, and that is absolutely crazy since it's only week 3. The biggest issue here is this offensive line gives Matthew Stafford no time to throw the ball down the field, which is really going to limit the opportunities of Demarcus Robinson. Which means now we only have tight ends to discuss and a few of my hits and misses from week 2. The hits, Trey McBride and George Kittle. I literally had them 1 and 2 in my rankings, and they finished 1 and 2 just last week. Now, the same cannot be said for Sam Laporta, one of my misses, who I had ranked 3rd overall and barely did a damn thing. And then on top of that, I didn't have Hunter Henry high enough. We liked him in the preseason as potentially being the binky for Jacoby Brissett, but it didn't start off that way. And now all of a sudden, he's looking like the safe and reliable option in New England, at least in the passing game. But let's go ahead and bring up the tiers here for week 3. In tier 1, it's Trey McBride, Brock Bowers, and George Kittle. Now, we know Arizona is going to have to throw the ball against Detroit if they want to have a chance. One of their top targets is Trey McBride. He's the volume guy. Then Brock Bowers arguably could have one of the higher ceilings to finish out this season in a great matchup going up against Carolina this week. Yes, please. He's up inside tier 1. And then George Kittle with no CMC, with no Deebo Samuel. That means more George Kittle in a matchup going up against the Rams, who have been beat through the secondary majority of the season. Down in tier 2, this is where I have Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce, Dalton Kincaid, Mike Gesicki, Jake Ferguson, and Kyle Pitts. Now, obviously, Laporta has a great matchup, but he really hasn't been a part of this offense to start the season. At some point, they're going to have to get him more looks. That definitely could happen this week, and if you own him, you're probably starting him. As for Travis Kelce, we tried to avoid him all off season long, and now people are starting to see why. But I will say this, with the running game banged up, that does up the likelihood that we could see more Travis Kelce in the coming weeks. Then we go down to Dalton Kincaid. Could have had a bigger week in week 2, but they didn't have to throw the ball because James Cook was running wild. Then we go down to Mike Gesicki, and this may be the highest he's been ranked maybe ever, but the matchup is that good. They're using him in this offense, and now he gets to go against Washington at home in Cincinnati. I got him at number 7. Number 8 is Jake Ferguson coming off injury, and we really need to pay attention to him rest of the week to make sure he's 100% full go, but he's going up against Baltimore this week. Most importantly, though, if he's 100% healthy, he's the number 2 option in this passing offense of the Dallas Cowboys. And then Kyle Pitts in a matchup going up against Kansas City, who has been very susceptible to opposing tight ends. Now, we haven't really seen Kyle Pitts be relied upon in this offense, and that's why he's this low. There is just so much unknown at the tight end position in 2024. After you get past the first 3 or 4 or so, it's a crapshoot on everyone. Which only leaves tier 3 here. It's Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Pat Freiermuth, Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, because right now I'm feeling fancy, Hunter Henry, and Colby Parkinson. Now right here at the top, we got both Baltimore tight ends and Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely in that matchup going up against Dallas. Outside of Zay Flowers, these are the only 2 options in this passing offense that are really worth a crap. The problem is they eat into each other's ceiling and really have a hard time performing in the same game. You never know whose week it's going to be. And that's why we find them down here in tier 3. Then we go to Pat Freiermuth. He's getting the looks, he's getting the targets, but they're not going down the field at all now in a matchup going up against the Chargers. Which then takes us to the old man, Zach Ertz of the Washington Commanders in a matchup going up against Cincinnati. As much as we want to see Jaden Daniels push the ball down the field more to the likes of Terry McLaurin and De'Ami Brown, he's really reliant on Zach Ertz right now, and that's why he's this high. Then Dallas Goedert. And honestly, I expected more from him last week with no A.J. Brown. The fact that he wasn't really overly looked at in that game kind of gave me pause for the cause going forward, so he's down here at the bottom of tier 3, followed by Hunter Henry in a matchup going up against the Jets. I'm not going to overhype Henry, who's really had just one good game here last week. But really, aside from that, they just don't score a whole lot of touchdowns in New England, and honestly, we need touchdowns at the tight end position. Do you realize that 20 yards and a touchdown these days makes you a top 5 tight end, basically? And then lastly, it's Colby Parkinson. We got Demarcus Robinson. We got Tutu Atwell. We got Colby Parkinson. It's not exactly murderer's row here for the Los Angeles Rams, but they're going to have to throw the ball against San Francisco in order to have a chance. He may not rack up a lot of receptions or get a lot of yardage, but I could see him potentially getting a red zone look or two this week if they can even get that close. But all right, there you have your fantasy football rankings for week 3. Now, if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to hit the like button if you haven't already and consider subscribing. I don't care that it's already week 3. We have a long season ahead of us. And like I said at the beginning of this video, when we can do rankings together as a community, that's when we find the most success possible. So instead of getting butthurt if you don't like where a player is ranked, let's talk about it and try to figure out where they really belong. Now I'm going to go ahead and get out of here for the day. Hopefully you guys enjoy the rest of your day though, and then most importantly, do your part to make the world a better place.
Analytics off the chain.